Good evening, everyone. Let's see, we're still trickling a little bit. We're up to 117 participants so far. So let me give it another 15 seconds and I'll pull up what I need. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight for our graduate student interview panel. I'm Corey Sussman. I'm the NISCA graduate student liaison and currently a first-year graduate student at New York Tech, also known as NYIT. First, I would like to thank Dr. Rotunda for helping set up the meeting tonight. And also, he's the NISCA Executive Director, Dr. Ian Levy, the NISCA Vice President of Counselor Educators, the NISCA President, Dr. Cynthia Wally, and the entire board for the support for this program and so their support of graduate students throughout the state of New York. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and without NISCA, this event wouldn't be possible. I'd also like to thank our panelists for taking the time out of their busy schedule to meet with us tonight and to help us all learn and understand the hiring process that many of us are about to go through, and as all of the other ones get to prepare for next year and in the future, as well as our future profession. So I'm really excited to have them all here tonight, and thank NISCA for sponsoring this event tonight. Please give me a moment to check if Mary is in one of our panelists, which I don't see her listed right now. But we'll continue. We have, like to please allow me to introduce our panelists. We have Dr. Tracy Siegel. She's the Department Chair for Guidance and Counseling at Great Neck North Middle School. She's also an adjunct professor of school counseling at New York Institute of Technology. And we also have Mr. James White. He's a former school counselor and currently the secondary assistant principal at Brunswick Central Central School District. And he's also the NISCA Region 4 governor. We'll also be joined later by Mary Banasak, who's a coordinator of school counseling for K through 12 at Victor High School. Before we begin, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. If you wish to submit them anonymously, I am going to put a link in the chat. This way, if you don't feel comfortable with people seeing your question, many of you have already submitted questions through that anonymous link that I sent out via the email. That link is still live. So if you already have that email, you can go to that. We've received over 30 questions before the event even starts tonight. So we have a great list of questions for our panelists. And once I ask the first question, I'll put that link right into that chat. And you can go to that and ask any questions, and I'll keep going back and forth between the list to make sure all of our questions can be answered. So if you have any questions, please put that in the chat. And I will start off with asking the first question of the evening. It seems to be a popular question. What time should I start arriving for an interview?
I could take that. I just want to say hello to everybody. Dr. Tracy Siegel, as Corey had introduced me earlier. I have to start off by just congratulating all of you for making the greatest decision. There's no profession as wonderful and rewarding as being a school counselor. I tell my students at New York Tech all the time that every day I've been doing this since 1995. I was a teacher first and a counselor and now department chair. And every day that I walk into my school building, I have a smile on my face and I'm excited for a new day. And I'm not making that up, as my students can tell you. It's wonderful. And I say it's the best decision my 20-something-year-old self ever made. So congratulations on that. Corey, can you repeat the question? How soon should you show up?
Yes, and I forgot to mention, I will put the question that's currently being asked as well in the chat. So everyone will know what question we're on. The first question is, what time should I arrive for an interview?
I mean, my opinion, certainly other panels can have different opinions. I would always say coming at least 15 minutes early. I've gone on interviews and I've gotten there 45 minutes early and I'll sit in the car for the first 20 or 25 because you definitely don't want to be late Sometimes on interviews, there could be an opportunity to do a writing, not even an opportunity, a requirement to have a writing sample. If you get there early, sometimes you can do it beforehand. If not, you would do it after. But to walk in 15 minutes early, I think is very appropriate. You definitely do not want to be late for sure. And traffic could be so unpredictable. James, I don't know if you have a different thought.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Definitely, I wouldn't say enter the building more than 15 minutes early. They've got other stuff going on as well. Certainly, traffic, depending where you are, could be an issue. So certainly, if you feel that way, just get there early, get in your parking lot, get in the parking lot, take a snack, relax, take a deep breath, get your thoughts together. But yeah, certainly, I would enter the building more than 15 minutes early. And typically, that they'll kind of communicate what their process is to you.
Thank you. So our next question is a very popular question as well. That's why it's question number 2. What should I bring to the interview? And what should we bring to the interview in terms of a portfolio? Very popular question tonight was the portfolio. So I kind of put it into this question. So once again, what should I bring to the interview? And what should we bring to our interview in terms of a portfolio?
Yeah, I guess I can take the lead on that one. So yeah, this is my first year as an administrator, but I was a school counselor for 6 years previously before. And one of the biggest things in graduate school is they always talk about our portfolio and having that current and being ready and things like that. I'll be honest, so maybe some other graduate programs are different, or other states where they interview, it's part of the process. Over the years, I've probably interviewed, I'd say, for school counseling jobs, probably for over 30 school counseling positions throughout the years. I've always brought the portfolio with me. They never actually asked to see it at all these different schools. As an administrator now, I've kind of got like an administrator portfolio with some career things that I've done as well. This past year, I interviewed with about 5 or 6 different school districts as an administrator position, and they never asked to see it as well. So again, other districts are different, but in terms of a portfolio, I've personally never been asked, but certainly maybe Tracy might have a different perspective.
Yeah, so when I sit on selection committees, I look through, choose candidates to come in for interviews and sit on selection committees. There are different stages of that process. Is something that you, in a portfolio, even if you're not asked for anything, something that would be helpful for you to have certainly would be a resume and cover letter. And the reason I say that is because sometimes there might be applications for you to fill out where they're asking for a lot of information in terms of previous employers with addresses and phone numbers. And just to have everything right there rather than having to retrieve everything, where you went to school, the years you graduated, even though they're things that you know, to have all of that in front of you could be very helpful. Also with the list, also a list of references. If you're applying, especially for a high school position, sample letters of recommendation that you've written for students. If there's a letter of introduction that you give to yourself, or that you would give send out to staff or families, could be very helpful. Copies of your certifications when you get those certifications, because in human resources, they may ask for those documents, for copies of those, even if they don't ask you to bring it. And then if you have anything, observations that you may have had during your internship or your practicum, could be handy for you also. Will they ask for it? Probably not, but there are things that just would be helpful to have at your fingertips just in case.
Thank you. That's a really important information for everyone. That was like I said, it's been a very frequently asked question in the forums. And thank you for all that are submitting questions. A couple of these questions are actually going to be touched upon. So we will get to a lot of those questions that were just submitted and other questions that had previously been submitted. So the next question is a very popular question. How do I find job openings? When do job openings usually post? And how long after you apply would you typically be contacted?
questions.
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly just a couple different platforms that you can look at. New York, I'm familiar with OLAS. So upstate New York, that's what we have. It's OLAS, OLAS. I think jobs.org. I think it is. If you just Google it, first thing that pops up. There's also School Spring. There's also Teachers. There's also Carney Sandow, which is like more of like a private school type thing. It's got some prep schools in there as well. There's also higheredjobs.com. I've seen sometimes they have school counseling jobs on there as well. It's more higher ed, geared towards higher ed, but they have some of those things like that. There's also some international platforms as well. So certainly some of you guys, I'll make a plug right now for Facebook. I know that that's probably a little bit of my generations. I know some people are more on Instagram and some other things like that, but Facebook's got some amazing groups out there. And a lot of people post positions all the time. I was in a group today. Someone posted that LAUSD out in California is hiring 35 counselors for this upcoming school year. I get emails and stuff all the time. Virginia's hiring new counselors. Just got to think about Wisconsin the other day. They're hiring more counselors. So again, it's one of those things where and when they get posted, typically in New York budget season, I'd say in the spring, they're usually posting in the spring for next following year. But it just depends. Also on sometimes the other thing too is like our district, example, we post on OLAS usually for about a month to 5 weeks. And we don't actually look at resumes or applications until the posting's closed. What some districts do is they will actually start reviewing resumes and stuff before and might actually contact you before the closing date starts. So that's something that other districts do as well. So it just depends on the district. Our district, we've hired probably 3 people this year so far since I've been a principal. Typically, we're a smaller school, so our process goes a little bit quicker. There's not as many rounds as well. So depending on, again, the size of the district, how many rounds as well is when you possibly could hear back. The other thing too is with our district this year, we've had, I'll just be honest, we don't, our teacher contract, we don't pay the best. And so counselors are part of this teacher contract. And so we've actually lost a couple of people in the process this year. And what we learned very quickly is that we don't want to call people and say, hey, you didn't get the job right away. Because we've actually had to go to our second or third person this year because we've actually lost people in the process because they took a job elsewhere that they were just able to pay them a little bit more. And so it just, those are just some of the things to think about and consider as well.
So I'm on Long Island, and I would say that OLAS, which is what James had spoken about earlier, which is OLAS, is probably the most common, way to find a job. And districts are starting now to advertise. I think even currently, at least for Long Island, there might be 5 or 6 positions that are posted now. So it's definitely not too early. A piece of advice for OLAS, when you're applying, when you go onto OLAS, you open up a portal for yourself and you would submit your resume and your cover letter. And then when you apply for a position, you'll apply and then it'll ask you, do you want to upload a specific cover letter for this position? My advice is always do that and personalize it to the district. Because I know when I look through resumes for a position, I'll have 300 or 400 resumes that I'm looking through and cover letters. And I will look at each one. And if a cover letter is not personalized, and it doesn't have to have my name on it, it could be the superintendent's. That's okay. But if it's not personalized to this position and to my district, I wonder how dedicated this applicant would be in a position if you can't spend the 5 minutes to personalize the cover letter. What does that say about your dedication? So I always look at that. That isn't, for me personally, that's an important piece.
Yeah, 100% agreed. And it's, so, we had a position just this past summer it wasn't a school counseling position, but yeah, I mean, we could just right away, whether it's the building principal, their superintendent, or the director, if there's that's fine. But certainly just look at the school district, find their vision or mission and tie it back in there to something and whatever it is. But certainly you can, at this point, again, it's only my first year on the other side of it now, but also I've, interviewed for a lot of positions. You can tell when someone's really put some thought and effort into a cover letter versus it being generic. Especially when you're getting 300 to 400, it's cumbersome. It takes a lot of time. And so those people that have put in the time and effort, you can definitely tell that.
And when you upload it to OLAS, upload it as a PDF. Because if you don't upload it as a PDF, OLAS could mess up the formatting. And you don't want to spend all that time to have this beautiful resume and cover letter. And then the person is looking at it, the districts look at it, and it's all unformatted. But a PDF will preserve that formatting.
I would just add that as you write your cover letter and your resume, to make sure that you proof it and make sure there are no spelling errors or grammatical errors. Take your time to have someone else look it over, do the spell check, and make sure that it is your best effort and your best representation of yourself.
The other thing too is I would just echo cover letter, 1 page, no more than 1 page, and then also resume. Some of you might not have enough stuff for 2 pages on a resume, and that's okay. That's completely okay right now. You guys are just coming out of grad school, applying for those first jobs. That's okay. So I would certainly you can stretch things a little bit, but certainly make sure you're honest and accurate with what you put on there, because there'll be some things on there that people might start to check and look at. And if things don't add up or line up, you could be called in it. So just be very, very careful about stretching the truth or not putting some accurate things on there. You can get yourself in trouble.
Thank you, and welcome, Mary. And thank you to the person who told me I was not posting the questions to everyone. I was accidentally direct messaging. Now I should be posting to everyone, but you actually just touched on question 4. Dr. Siegel mentioned about the format. That was actually the next question. What format should folks be applying with? So PDF. So thank you for that. So then the next question is, what are employers looking for in school counselors? This one says specifically this year, but I will say in general, what are employers looking for when someone is interviewing?
I can
Great
take
question.
that one from my experience in Victor. We're outside of Rochester, New York, and I'm director of counseling in our district. After 30 years as a school counselor, I can say that what we look for is someone who has a strong work ethic, a demonstrated work ethic, the ability to collaborate with others, your willingness to ask questions and to work as a teammate. Because really, I have never worked in a position where I've been working alone. Whether you're the only school counselor, you're still going to work with a school psychologist, school social worker, administrator, or if you're on a team of 6 school counselors in our building right now, 2 psychologists, 1 social worker, 4 administrators, we're always working together. And no one person can do it alone, but your willingness to communicate and collaborate is going to be really critical in the interview process.
I would say
I think
we're
this one
always
is still on
looking
mute.
for, we want to know that you always put students first, and that you look at each student as an individual with their own unique set of needs. And when you're asked questions, whether it's a situation, or I guess there are a lot of situational questions on interviews. And if you just always keep in mind what is in the best interest of this individual student, I really believe that you could never go wrong. But in addition to everything that Mary had said, is just somebody who's student-centered, who has a passion for advocating for children, who's a team player. And they're not afraid to, if you make a mistake, you're going to own your mistake. Nobody's perfect, and we know that, but we want to know who you are. And not that, you're trying to fit a mold that you think that we want to see, but it's putting forth the best representation of yourself.
I was going to add as well, when you were talking about the portfolio and bringing that with you to the interview, I was thinking about the notes you might receive from students thanking or communicating with you. Oftentimes, there may be a question in the interview about, how do you connect with students, or what has been your greatest impact on a student? And if you could reflect on that and share that, something that was really meaningful to you and important to you that meant a lot, that would be a great thing to share, to show your compassion, to show your willingness to work with different individuals with different needs.
Okay, thank you. The next question we have is,
Or can I just add
yeah.
one thing to the last
Go ahead.
question? If when I was doing this, when I was hiring counselors, we were always looking for candidates who spoke a language other than English. And if you have any skill in any language other than English, don't forget to put it on your resume. Any of those skills are exceptionally important. And where I worked, at least in a lot of districts, that resume is going to make it to the top of the pile first, because we were always looking for those skills. Thank you.
Yeah, Bob, some districts around the country, depending on what part of the country too, they actually have it in there. They'll put it right on the posting, like bilingual counselor, just because it's such a huge percentage of their population that they really need someone to be able to, communicate with the majority of their population. So great point.
I would also add that if you have experience with students with special needs, to make sure that you highlight that on your resume, and what disability areas and what role you played.
And ENL.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The next question we have is on the interview lines. So how does one adequately prepare for interview questions, and what are some sample questions?
So great question. So for me, I actually have a whole interview binder. It's a 3-ring binder that I just started looking at questions like online that you can get. I think Ask has got some questions too, but when I was going through this process, I had a whole interview binder, and I just used to reach out to, friends or colleagues that I had connections with in education and just do mock interviews with them. That really helped me gain confidence, as well as understanding eye contact and just other things as well. So it really just depends. I think there's a lot of questions that are going to be very, very similar. There's probably going to be 3 or 4 that are going to be across the board when you interview, but then there's always going to be, each school is always going to have a couple different questions more specific to their school in terms of what they're aligned with as well. So I think that's the other thing too as well. So I think there's always going to be, some standard questions, but then also districts are going to deviate from there as well. And then in terms of who's on the interview, it really depends on district to district. But I think about when I was interviewing, typically there's other counselors. If there's other counselors in the building principal or the assistant principal, other people are going to collaborate with social workers, psychologists. So just depends. I interviewed with one urban school, and they didn't know who the position was going to be for what building or whatever. So they had a whole committee of people represented through K-12. It was like 20 people around the room, and they just were firing questions left and right. And they had like every department represented, like K-12, phys ed, art, music, because they just didn't know, and they wanted to make sure, like, when they were interviewing candidates, that they had, a good connection or good pulse of that candidate. So really just depends on district, how small they are. Could be multiple rounds, could be a writing sample letter of recommendation that you might have to write, sample group lesson as well. There could be a board member or parent on the committee as well. Students are asked to be involved in a lot of community committees now. We always have a student on every single committee that we hire someone now as well. So depends district to district, but that's just kind of some of the things that I've seen throughout the years.
Yeah, and also preparing I always recommend think about some really key moments in your experiences and situations, specific situations that stand out to you where you really made a difference in the life of a child, whether it's a child who had loss in their life, child with anxiety, you helped maybe with executive functioning, who overcoming some sort of struggle. Think about the specific examples of how you've helped certain students, certain families, a difficult situation with a teacher that maybe you had. And then when you're asked situational questions on the interview, you could give examples of what you've done. Not to just say what you would do, but to demonstrate what you've done in those situations.
I would say in our most recent interviews, we hired last spring during COVID, and it was challenging because they were Zoom interviews with a number of people on the committee. And if you happen to have a Zoom interview this year, just make sure that you are looking into the camera, that you are maintaining eye contact with the people on the screen, that you are smiling and look approachable. I know it's hard and it's nerve-wracking to be on a Zoom interview, but really to try to help get your personality across. Watch what's in your background and what's around you and what might be interfering or distracting you from the interview. The other thing we did was in our final interviews, we asked the interview candidates to develop a PowerPoint class lesson on grit and resilience as students were entering the high school. And we said there would be special ed students and ENL students in the classroom with individual aides who could support them. How would you create that 5-minute presentation? And what would you ask the students to do? So there was an actual task they had to complete. And it really stood out when people followed the directions and others who did not at all. So if you're being asked to do something in your final interview, make sure you follow the directions of what have been given to you.
That reminds me of where I interviewed a few years ago. I hired a counselor, there's one in particular, and she's outstanding. And on the first round of interviews, she was not the strongest candidate, but she was strong enough to come back for the second round, which was a demo lesson, which is like running a group. And what made her stand out so much in that demo lesson is her attention to each individual student. So whereas candidates who did the first round, they were top candidates, when it came time for that demo lesson, they were so concerned with getting through everything that they planned on. And they was like checking a box, that students would respond and they would say to them, okay, great, and then go on to the next. Rather than going the layers deep in the questioning, the candidate who ends up being offered the job was so focused on the student and made it seem as though that student was the only person who mattered in the world, and just really was making that connection. So although in the first round, I almost didn't want to have her go through, she really was not strong. And she also had it didn't matter to me at all. The point is that she was hired even though she had like zero experience with any sort of computer management system and scheduling. She was worried about that. But she was so connected to the students that that's really what got her the job. Really stood out.
Thank you. The next grouping of questions are on the line of within the actual interview. You guys have touched a little bit on some of the answers to these questions. So I went through and looked a little bit to kind of organize some of the questions that are coming up. And this happened to be a pretty frequently asked question by our participants. What is one way you have answered the question, what would you say is your greatest weakness? And how do you use that to your benefit? And that was asked about 4 or 5 times. So it's clearly something that our attendees are really interested in.
I could take that question. I don't mind. I mean, I'd never answer that because I feel like, what is that going to tell me? I mean, like, I don't know. I don't particularly love that question. But I would say, you know, it depends on what you believe your weakness is. But if you really don't know, I would come up with an example. If you get, nervous or, anxiety, and just relate it to students and how you could use that experience or that weakness to relate to students and to teach about strategies to overcome if they're experiencing the same thing. If it's something with organization, you struggle with organization, you're not always the most organized person, but you've developed strategies over the years to help you cope, and it's always a challenge for you, and you're able to apply that now in your work with students. So I would always, whatever it is that you can identify as your weakness, how you can use that to help your students. I don't know. The other panelists have other thoughts too.
Dr. Siegel, you mentioned the candidate who didn't know your computer system. We had one as well, but she said, I've never used School Tool, but I've contacted a few of my friends who are in districts that do, and I've started learning the process, like taking the initiative on your own to try to improve yourself or to gain some understanding and knowledge of that system. So turning a negative into a positive, that you would go the extra mile to learn more about it and be better prepared during the interview to answer questions about it, if you knew that was an area that might come up.
Yeah, I agree with that. And almost changing the language in terms of a weakness and just say, actually, I don't consider it weakness, but like an area of growth where I can see myself, and just change it to a positive right away. And then whatever you decide to answer just automatically changes the narrative into a positive, because again, I just don't like that question. Also, that question can be set up too in terms of if you answer really, really honestly, and then you answer and it just turns off the committee, that could be a setup question too. So just be careful in terms of how you answer that question.
I think there are a few people coming from outside of education that are very used to that question being asked. I know I was probably asked that at least 50% of my interviews in higher education, the weakness question. So I hope that's good to hear that not many interviews will have that question asked, because that, like you just mentioned, James, it is a kind of a trap question. So you have to be really careful with the way that you do answer that. The next question is actually an interesting question. How do you answer a question presented to you that you have no experience with? So if there's a question that the interview panel asks you and you really don't know the answer to, how would you handle that?
I would just be honest and say, I really have no experience with that yet, so that's a difficult one for me to answer at this point in my career. I don't know, James or Tracy, if you have other thoughts.
But I want to learn. I would love
Yeah.
to learn, and I'm eager.
Yeah, be honest, be truthful, because if you start to answer and say, actually, yeah, I've got this. Oh, tell me about that. And then because again, if they start to press you with a 1A or 1B or 1C follow-up, and then you don't have anything there, they can, again, right away start to see that. But if you just say, hey, I'm willing to learn, I'm eager, and again, I think we've probably all been around people or hired people that haven't had any experience as well. So again, as people say, yes, you don't have enough experience, but just they've seen something in you. So just, again, and a lot of you guys will get jobs that come with you who have no experience, and you'll get jobs. So just be honest and be truthful. If you start to sway a little bit, people can catch on. So just be careful.
I will.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, at the end of an interview, when I'm asked to have questions, what questions should I ask? This was asked like 5 or 6 times as well as part of the preliminary questions.
I always like if I was if I am the successful candidate, what is the first task that or was the first task that I would be expected to do? I don't know other question, the other panelists, if you had other thoughts on that. I know it is always a tough question because you could have something in mind, but then they've already answered it during the course of the interview. I know we always ask at the end, was there anything that you were hoping to be able to share with us that we didn't ask the question that gave you that opportunity to do so? This way it gives them, you might have some things you want to share. I feel like that's an easier question that gives the candidate more opportunity. I feel like that is always a difficult one.
I think we ask the same question. Is there anything you'd like to share with us that we haven't discussed already? And that's where reflecting on a situation, a story of a child that you've worked with, something that's been really meaningful to you, some sense of accomplishment or something that you've learned that you didn't realize before, just to show your willingness to work hard, to learn, and to accept challenges that are new to you. You know, one thing I'm proud of is I learned so much about housing for a family that suddenly became homeless during the year. And I worked with the parent and the student to try to find the resources in our community to support them. And here's what we did. We reached out to this, or that, just to show how you've taken on a challenge and worked with the family or the student to support them.
Yeah, and just lastly, if you do have questions at the end, if you have questions for the people that you're, because again, you want to be interviewing them as well to make sure it's the right fit. So again, that's another opportunity where you've looked at their district website, maybe their state ed report card, maybe they've got some unique programs or things like that. That's an example. Like for a school locally, I interviewed a few years back. Their graduation rate went like 10% over the course of 3 or 4 years. It went up 10%. So I was like, over that course of 3, like I see you guys have really done a great job of what's some of the work that school counselors like had impact on that, like how are they involved in that process? So again, just looking at the data, looking at the same website, the school's website. So just again, that's a chance, the last impression, to really showcase that you've done your homework and preparing for that interview as well.
Or if you have a special skill or talent that you want to highlight, for example, if you're an athlete, or you were a student athlete and you would want to coach, or you're very involved in the music program, or a musician, and you would want to, you could ask if there would be an opportunity for you to coach whatever your sport is, or direct a musical, the drama production. Because that always also gives the it allows you to stand out a little bit more and highlight some unique experiences that you may have.
We're always looking for club advisors. So even if you don't have a specific talent or skill, but you have an interest in supporting students in leadership capacities, community internships, whatever it might be that's important to you or that catches your eye as you review the district website, the school website, and look at the clubs and activities they offer. They want to know how you're going to give back to the school. How are you going to get involved? How are you going to contribute to our school community and our school culture? So anything that you can share, if you have sung at a coffee house or played the guitar, and you might bring that into the school, some way. Those are great opportunities that we're really looking for people to have ideas of how we can bring our students back in full next year and help them feel a part of a community and be warm and welcomed in our school, because so many students have not been there this year and have not felt that connection.
Thank you. I'm looking back at some of the questions that have been submitted in the chat, as well as the forms that the students are filling out, our attendees are filling out, excuse me. And there's a couple of questions going back to the resume. So if I can go circle back to that. What catches the eye in the terms of a resume that could help you get the initial interview? I would like to group all these, so I apologize. So what catches the eye on a person's resume? How far back in time should the person submit their information for on their resume? And then I would like to go back into the chat and get this question. And language, what tense should you be using in the resume? So the person wrote, do you say collaborates or collaborating when talking about your experience working with teachers and supervisors to assist students? So I'll try to get that all in the chat because it's 3 different questions put into one from 3 different people. So if you need me to repeat any of that, I'm more than happy to.
I will just go to the wording on the resume. My mother was an English professor at our local college, and she used to redline my resumes when I was applying. Make sure that you always put a verb, to collaborate. Use verbs, okay?
Agree with that. The action words.
And there's actually a sheet that I have too that maybe I can forward to Bob and he can send out. There's like a whole list of words that you can use, so you're not using the same like 2 or 3 or 4 words over and over again. So you can start to like put some different words in there. Because I like when I see like different words that kind of like pop and stand out a little bit, not just the same words. Also, it's a job you used to work at. Make sure you're putting past tense as well in there. But again, I think you're right. I think definitely make sure you're having people proofread it, and also the font is consistent. You're not changing font styles throughout the resume, things like that. Make it sure it's very, very easy to read for people that are reading it. It's the same size, the same, like just make sure it's very, very consistent throughout. And there's no wasted space on there as well.
And if it's, I always say if something that you're doing now, keep it in the present tense, but if it's a past position, put that in the past tense, and to be specific, not just ran counseling groups, but what were the counseling groups in? Were they bereavement groups? Were they divorce group? Was it social skills groups? Just be as specific as you can with with the work that you did. You collaborated with teachers, but on what? What did you collaborate on? The club advisor. Well, what was the club that you were an advisor on? Just being very, very, very specific. And then also in terms of how far back do you go, I think it's more about what the work was and how is it relevant. I was looking at a resume I was helping somebody with, and they, worked in retail, and they were picking out, I don't know, whatever the merchandise was for the floor. And we spoke more about what was that position, because, picking out the merchandise for the floor really isn't relevant to school counseling. But what did you do in that position that was related to counseling? Whether it's how did you interact with people? So what about the position that you're putting on there is relevant to the work of a school counselor? But if the position had no relevance and it was a while ago, 5 years or more, reevaluate, do you need to put that on there? I don't know the other panelists, how they feel about that.
Yeah, I think there's always a lot of transferable skills. Don't sell yourself short. I was just talking to a grad student. I think I was doing something a few months ago, and they had like a lot of really good experience. And I was like looking at the resume and stuff. I said, listen, I was like, this is good. I was like, but you've got a lot of really cool things on here that like you really need to like articulate on here. I'm like, don't sell yourself short. So just again, and like I said, the other thing too with resumes is if you're having people look at it, make sure you have a couple different people look at it. because I might have a couple good points in there. Miriam might have a couple different points in there. Trace might have. So again, I'm not the end all be all. I don't think that at all. And I always tell people when I review their stuff, have someone else look at it as well. I don't think I know everything, and I'm always constantly learning. So again, have multiple eyes on it. And then once you get a couple people that you really, really trust in your process, they're kind of in your corner. Those are your go-to people, and really look for their advice. But definitely have multiple people have eyes on your stuff.
See, one of the questions about keep the resume one page, I do not agree with that at all. I think you want to highlight yourself, and if we had to limit, if you have so much, all this wonderful experience, and why would you limit it? I think my CV is like 3 pages. I don't buy into the 1-page thing.
I think as long as it's relevant to the job you're applying to, it's okay to include it. So if you have experience that's relevant, definitely. The other piece to think about including is if you have worked to support a New York State Education Department initiative, like Aaron supporting the instruction in Aaron's Law, or health goals and objectives from the new health regulations, things like that. If you've been a part of those lessons, I know we're always looking for counselors who understand what the newest regulations are and are prepared to work towards meeting those.
Yeah, I'm with Tracy as well. If you have 2 pages, go to the 2 pages. Certainly, like I said, don't sell yourself short. But again, if you're just stretching to be able to get to that 2nd page, that's an issue. Just make sure what you have is everything is of substance. So just remember that. I think currently my resume is stuff I've done 10 years ago before I started. I still have it in a professional development resume. So like if I ever need to reference it, but I don't no longer have it on there. And then my professional resume now is 2 pages, but potentially could be 2.5, depending on what I do in the next few years.
Great, thank you. One of the next questions is, when interviewing for counseling positions, should we expect theory-driven questions, or will it be more about getting to know the candidate?
We've asked theory-driven questions as well, like what theory do you espouse to? But I really like it when people answer how they rely on different theory bases in different situations, and give specific examples of how they support students using that theory instead of just giving the textbook answer.
I couldn't agree more.
Awesome, thank you. And if we can see that some people are asking questions, and we're able to answer some of those while we're rolling. So please, if you want to put questions in the chat, please go ahead and do so. And one of our panelists may be able to answer that. And if I accidentally send a direct message to you, I apologize. Every time you send a direct message, it automatically goes to the person that sent the message next for my message. So I apologize. Let's see. The next question is, what is an appropriate window frame for sending interviewers a thank you note or a thank you response?
I would say within 24 hours.
Yeah.
As soon as you get home.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that was an easy question. We need to throw you some softballs, I guess, every once in a while. I'm going through the list and trying to look at some other questions before we get on to kind of the next level of questions. So I'm going through the list of folks that have submitted through the form. We answered that. If someone's visibly nervous in an interview, how does that affect the way the interviewees portray them? And does it have any effect at all?
It to me, it doesn't bother me because I think that's a good thing if you're a little nervous, and that's okay. And so I always try to, we have water there for them usually always, and just try to have them take a deep breath and relax. We've all obviously before working there, we've all been on their side of the, aisle as well. So just try to really make them relax and, let them know that just, hey, everything's going to be, going to be okay and everything like that. But you can certainly tell if someone is nervous and things like that. Their body language is you're going to see it right away. I don't hold it against anyone at all. That's not a problem for me as long as they're still able to articulate their thoughts, and have some depth to it as well. But that doesn't bother me at all. That's a natural feeling to be nervous.
And I appreciate it if they say, boy, I'm really nervous coming in here. This is, something I've prepared for and I'm really looking forward to interviewing today. But boy, I really feel nervous. That self-awareness and being able to communicate that just shows a counseling skill.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's okay. We expect that. We expect that you'll be nervous. But if you're tripping over your words and you just stop yourself and say, I'm sorry, I'm very nervous. Can I start over? It's all okay. We're human and, we're counselors and we're in education. We want to see that human side.
Thank you. And if anyone has, we're going to kind of move on to the next level of questions. And these are kind of what I would say more personal questions, but other people may be in the same boat. So people did kind of ask a little bit more of a personal question, but I do feel that a lot of these questions do pertain to people who might have been afraid to ask these questions. And please continue to provide any other questions you have. Put it in the chat or send it if you want it anonymously. Please use that link at the top of the chat. And I am reviewing as we go. So one of the questions is, I'm transitioning from another field to school counseling. How can I prepare my resume and portfolio so I can stand out amongst my colleagues who have more extensive background in education?
It goes back to those transferable skills we talked about earlier, making sure that you have those transferable skills. And then if you have other opportunities, maybe you haven't been a direct school counselor before, but maybe you've had some substitute teaching experience. Maybe you've been a TA, maybe you've coached as well, done some other stuff in the community, Boys and Girls Club or whatever. So again, think about the transferable skills, the collaborative work, the teamwork, the organization, the time management that you've had in your other field that will be transferable. Maybe you've evaluated people in the past or something. You can talk about that as well, and things like that. So just think outside the box. You can have to think outside the box a little bit more.
It's great when we have candidates who have worked in other fields and bring those skill sets to our environment, especially at the high school level when we're talking about preparing students to be college and career ready. What better example is there than, being able to share different careers and career paths? Everybody's got a different path to their current position. And that's part of what we try to help students understand. There's no right way to get where you want to go. There are a variety of paths, and each path you take is going to develop certain skill sets in you that are unique and transferable to other paths.
Thank you. That's really helpful for a lot of the folks in this meeting. So I appreciate that. This question's come up a lot, and it's a new question because I think people overheard our beginning conversation before the session started. There are questions about transferable licenses between New York and other states. I'm not sure if anyone is aware or has good knowledge on this, but this has been asked a couple times. So I'm trying to frame this question properly. So if you have any knowledge of other states will accept New York State licenses, will they accept provisional licenses? So if students that have just graduated, will they accept provisional licenses, or will will professionals have to wait for a full license from the state of New York? And I don't know if you're able to answer this, but it has been asked a couple times.
Some states say that they do have reciprocity with New York. You would have to go in. Where did I may have seen that through ASCA where they spoke about the different state. Bob, I see your.
Yeah, I'm on the ASCO website. I'm going to put a link in the chats it goes state by state. It talks about reciprocity, what states were reciprocity with other states. It's got all of that detail in it. So we might have reciprocity in Alabama, but not Alaska. So you can look it up. I'll put it in the chat right now.
Yeah, if you get it in New York or in California, you're pretty good for most states. But certainly, like I said, Bob put the link in there, and you'll be able to see.
And the link is there. Thank you, Bob. Okay, I'm going to go back to my original questions here. Let's see. So we got so many questions, but a lot of them the questions have been answered in other questions. Okay, this is actually a pretty good interesting question. Is it better to apply and agree to something early for job security or wait for a better fit? If you do take an earlier offer but find a better one, how poorly does that reflect on you? I'll put this in the chat.
I guess I can speak to this one because this is my own personal experience. I did this. This was many years ago, and so this wasn't a school counseling position, but this was a higher ed position. But it kind of goes in the same line. And so I was 23 years old. So this is 11 years ago, and I applied to a job. And again, back then it was hard to get an interview. It was very, very hard. It was really, really hard. So I secured a job, and I interviewed there. It was great. Got the job. And then all of a sudden I continued to interview for other jobs because every other job across the state, they had a certain SL2 and they were going to pay me that. They were going to pay me $5,000 a year more. So I continued to interview. Long story short, the two schools I interviewed, they shared university presidents. So they started looking back and they started saying, how many people James White has the name Jaymes White? That can be a coincidence. So long story short, I went from having one job offer to two job offers to no job offers. And so I continued to interview. So they called me back in and I met with the vice president at the college and everything like that. And they're like, well, why did you continue to interview after meeting with us? And I said, listen, you're the only SUNY school across the state that pays less than every other SUNY school in the state. So they ended up actually offering me the job and then paid me more in line with every other SUNY school. And I said, listen, I'm just being honest. I'm like, every other SUNY school does this. And so I would be very, very careful of doing that. And again, I learned a hard lesson at 23. So I would always I get it though. It's real life, especially now. It's like you have a job, you secure a job. I'm not going to hold it against anyone personally. I'm not. I always feel you have to do what's best for you. But just be careful. People do talk. That's part of life. I personally don't hold it against me, but some people out there, they might hold it personally or whatever. So just be very, very careful in terms of, but the other thing too, is if you interview really, really well somewhere and you're a finalist, you don't get the job. Guess what? If I know a colleague or somewhere across the state or locally or whatever, I'm going to call that person and be like, listen, we had a person that interviewed, they were literally they were great. You got to interview this person. You got to interview them. And then, so that'd be my way of helping someone that maybe didn't get the job that, interviewed really, really well. So just, like I said, that's my experience from 11 years ago. It happened to me. Just be careful.
Thank you. Thank you for the answer. Anyone else? Is that a hard question to answer?
It's tough. It's tough. It's really tough. You gotta, I get it. Jobs only come up, some schools, especially if it's your dream school or whatever, they don't, some of these jobs come up around once in a blue moon. It's tough. So I get it. Like I said, I'm not going to take it personally against someone if they do that, but other people in other areas, districts, they might. So just, be careful.
I think that some of it also depends on at what point are you, rescinding.
That's
So,
true.
for example, are you going to, if you're telling the school that you're not going to start, that that you're not going to take the position after you've already signed, and it's now the first day of school or right before that, and now you're leaving this district in a very difficult position. They could hold you to a certain period of time, whether it's 30 days or they could hold you to that. But I think some of it also depends on the time frame. If it's still the spring, the position wasn't going to start until the fall, I could see a district, being more understanding, but it's really the impact that it'll eventually have on the students. So like I said, if it's going to be now that that's school potentially is not going to open with a counselor, that could be looked more negatively on.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that was a difficult question. I appreciate the honesty from you all about that. That's something that could go through some of our minds. We get multiple offers and one comes through that we really would want, but then, like James said, the maybe salary or something is much better. The location might be a lot better for someone that doesn't want to commute as far. So yeah, that could come up as an interesting topic of conversation with someone that does accept an offer but then wants to back out. So thank you. I'm trying to. A lot of these questions are repetitive. Where is that question? I'm not sure if any of you are aware of the DOE system, but this has come up in a couple of the questions. Do you know what the steps to apply to the DOE, Department of Education in the city? And is it any different than applying in the rest of the state?
I don't know much about you're talking about the New York City Department of Education. I don't know about it. They're not on OLAS, but I don't know what the steps are for that.
They post positions on their own website, on the DOE website, and they come up. So there'll be a bunch of positions, and you might not see any for a long time. They're always in and out of hiring freezes. I think currently they're not. But once you get in the process, you're in a pool of candidates, and there are hundreds and hundreds of schools that can look at that pool of candidates. And then they go through the process just like they do in any other school. They'll choose you to come and interview and so on. And the process is going to be a little bit different in every school depending on who the administrators in the schools are. But they start out with that pool of candidates and work from there. So you have to kind of monitor the DOE website to see when those jobs pop open to get your resumes in. But it looks a whole lot like OLAS, to be blunt. Once you get in it.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, that came up a couple of times with the question, so definitely wanted to make sure we asked that. This question is, how do you make your program seem adequate even if it is not KCREP approved and accredited, I would assume?
I think the interview is more about you than it is the program. So you could be a really strong candidate who didn't graduate from a KCREP accredited program, and then you could be not as strong, but having graduated from a very strong program. So I think it's more the focus, keeping the focus on you.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't even know if people on the interview committee, besides like maybe the director of counseling, if your district has one, are even going to know what that even is. So
Probably true.
Right. It's more about your experience and your personality and who you are and what you believe in than the accreditation, I think.
I saw in the chat that somebody had a question about demo lessons.
Yeah, please, if you want to answer that.
I think it was Caitlin. Hi, Caitlin. I see so many of my New York Tech students new, current and former. So it's nice to see all of you. We do demo lessons. A lot of districts do, a lot of districts do not, where we want to see you with students. So it might be running a group of, and we would give you the scenario. So it could be a group of, 8th grade students who are transitioning to high school. So you facilitate a group on that. It could be facilitating a social skills group. It could be, we would give you the topic, and you would come in prepared to lead a counseling group on whatever that topic is. So you would come up with a lesson plan, and you would have a copy of the lesson plan if you prepared 7 or 8 copies, so that you would have one to distribute to every member of the committee who would be observing you. And and then you would run the group, and then that would be a round, one of the interview rounds.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that question that was in our chat. So yeah, if you want to, please put more questions in the chat, and we'll get to those questions as we can. This question was an interesting question, I thought. Going back to interviewing, how can you sound knowledgeable but not come off as arrogant in an interview?
You make it about the students, not about you. So the focus is always on the student and the student's growth and the student's progress and the student's benefit, not about you. So
Thank
there's
you.
just a question about the demo lesson. Do you do that on the spot, or do you come back another day? It would be another day. So you would have your, most likely, but you would be told if you should prepare for, beforehand. If they wanted it to be in the same day, they would let you know. So if you typically you would have a round that was a traditional interview, and then you would go home, and then you would be called back, hopefully that day, if not within the next few days, and you would be invited to the next round. And then they would tell you over the phone. Sometimes it might be an email, but they would communicate with you. That would be a demo lesson. You'll have a group of 10th grade students, and what the topic would be, and how to prepare, and the amount of time you'll have.
Thank you. And this next question is a very specific question as well. We're kind of in that range of questions now. Do you have any tips or advice interviewing for master in social work positions that are also open to school counselors? I've heard this is possible, but would love further clarification or examples.
They know the difference between what a school counselor does and what a school social worker does. Be very clear on the differences and how you are prepared to address the needs of the students through the lens of a social worker.
Yeah, I agree. Upstate where we are, sometimes positions are posted as looking for a social psychologist, social worker, and counselor, and I literally cringe when I see those because it's just they're 3 different positions, and you need all 3. One's not better than the other. You literally need all 3. And so working with a smaller district now, it's again my first year there. So again, you have to understand the culture of the land, and education things take a while to change sometimes. So I'm just building trust in them, and in terms of having that school counseling background. And again, especially with budgets and stuff right now, I'm already starting to plant the seed in terms of trying to get a full-time counselor in the next 3 or 4 years. So it's just it takes time, but again, like Tracy said, definitely know the differences in terms of especially it's also probably going to be a deep candidate pool too if they're actually looking at 3 different certifications as well. So just be prepared for a really, really good candidate pool as well.
And that's a common question on interviews too for school counselors. What's the difference between a school counselor, a social worker, and a psychologist? And I always tell my students, never say that a psychologist just does testing. Because sometimes that's like a first thought, and it's like saying a school counselor just does scheduling. So just make sure that you could speak to the differences. I always say how the three overlap a lot, but we will all have an area of specialty. The first school counselor, that area of specialty could be, graduation requirements, college admissions process, and scheduling, but that's only a small part of what we do. Then the small, the social worker, they may have more of a focus and an emphasis on, supporting, families, community outreach, bridging that connection. And the school psychologist, an area that's unique to them is the psychological testing. But we all do there's so much overlap, but knowing those differences.
And you can find the roles and responsibilities on the professional websites for each of those positions that will really detail that for you so that you can fully understand it.
Oh, that's great.
Thank you. The next question, I'm going to kind of combine multiple questions again. So the question is based on like your practicum and internship sites. Should you be focusing those experiences into something that you're going to want to pursue as a career based on the elementary, middle school, or high school? And how much does that affect when you're applying if you don't have that experience that you may have missed, but you do want to apply to that level? So it's a little confusing because I'm trying to mix two different questions, a couple different questions. So basically, how much of an importance is the internship experience on the level that you're going to focus your job search on?
I would think it's helpful, but it's not necessary. And as long as you speak to the fact of why you are looking forward to working at the level you're applying to, and where your interest has stemmed from, and why, and how you can apply the skills that you learned in your other internships to that site, that would be a reasonable way to explain it.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that's a good question, I think, because a lot of people do have that concern that they weren't able to get internship hours or practicum hours at the specific grade level that they've been looking for. So thank you. Yeah, that's good to know that it's not going to be a deal breaker if there's something that you really want to do. Just make sure you know how to answer the questions, how you're going to focus, what your goals are. So thank you. We are getting a couple of questions about understanding the provisional license that we will be receiving once we graduate. So I think it's, once again, I'm trying to combine a couple of different questions into one. So if maybe you can explain to all of us, if someone would be willing to, explain what the provisional certificate that we earn after graduation, how long we have to get the permanent certification, and let's see, how important is it when we're applying that we have, I guess, is it a deterrent that we have a provisional certificate over someone that's already established and might have a permanent certificate or license?
No, not at all. It's not a negative to have. Everybody has it when they start. I mean, you need to have that when you start. It's not a negative at all.
You're all in the same boat.
There was a question about if your provisional expires, what do you do? You can renew it. I just looking at the state website. You can renew a provisional. There's a process to do that.
All right.
Someone
Thank
did
you.
it.
Yeah.
Someone
go
did
ahead.
have a question though about something about the university sponsoring provisional certificate or whatever. So this actually happened to a local student that I knew last year that graduated a local school. And so sometimes you can be eligible for an internship certificate as long as you have halfway, I believe it's halfway, either 30 credits or halfway done with your program. I can't remember what it is or whatever, but I think but anyways, the one school, depending just know that when you're looking to go to grad school, whatever, know if your school will do that for you. Some schools will, and some schools won't, depending on. And this school was K-CREP, and they wouldn't do that. They wanted you to completely complete your degree first. So again, it depends. It's school specific. So just that's something to know. Some schools will sign off the internship certificate, and some graduate schools won't.
I think there's a question about phasing out provisional licenses. I think they're switching to initial instead of the provisional, which is still temporary, and then it turns into, I think, professional.
Yep, to be in line with
the professional has the PD hours associated with it.
Now for school counseling. But that goes into effect 2022.
Right.
Great, thank you. I'm just going through the questions that I had prepared beforehand, the questions that have come through since we started our meeting. And I think we've exhausted all the questions. If anyone has any other questions, please put them in the chat. Or if you still want to do them anonymously, I will copy and paste that link again. It's all the way on the top. But
So,
if anyone has any other questions, I think I've exhausted all my questions right now.
someone did have a question earlier that I saw in the chat, and it was about something about, can references help or hurt you or something like that. So just number one, make sure that try to have your references as current as possible. I think that's definitely key. And try to make sure it's so the person really knows you, can speak to your skill set. But we had a situation, we hired, and the committee, I think there was 7 or 8 people on the committee, and we were literally torn between the last two people that we were that we sent on the superintendent. And basically what happened, they both were great. And it came down to their letters of reference, in terms of, because literally everything was even. They both interviewed well. The committee, they both literally had the same amount of points in terms of our 3-2-1 system and everything like that. And it literally just came down to their letters of reference. So again, not that they hurt either one of the candidates. Both had really good letters, but one just had more stronger letters of reference. So again, hopefully it doesn't ever come down to that. You can just be the clear-cut person that, I guess wins the interview process. But I've seen that happen on the back end after rounds of interviews.
Make sure that you always ask your references if they could, you could use them as a reference.
Yeah, don't let it be a surprise. Being hiring manager at one point in my life, it was always nice to not have a surprise person that didn't know they were getting a call, or in the same boat when you're asking, like Dr. Siegel said, don't let it be a surprise for someone that's getting a call. Just make sure that they're willing to give you a reference, because that's going to look bad if the person doesn't even know that they're giving a reference. And then we're getting some questions on here, and I just got one through our link. Person wanted to know, what should someone wear during an interview? Is there a certain dress code, or does something look better than other things? And you can answer that for all walks of life.
So, I mean, I'm traditional, and I feel like a suit, is most professional. That's how I always feel. I know that not everybody's going to feel the same way that I do. You want to make sure that you look neat.
I always had some lucky socks that I wore.
I would say after you get the job is probably the best time if you want to start wearing more eccentric clothes and things like that. Certainly do that. But and again, the first time, human nature is for people to judge right away. So again, as a guy, I would probably recommend wearing a white or a light shirt and just a tie. Doesn't matter if you're, dress pants and then a suit jacket. They don't have to be the same color, but as long as, again, they're clean and they look neat, they're not baggy and everything like that. I would just do that. So
Thank you. Looking through the questions that are coming through the chat. So this one question is, how do you get a copy of your certifications from Teach? They've been trying to get screenshots and a picture to upload to application sites. I don't know if anyone can answer that question.
That's a Teach question.
You can pay for a copy. I think if you go in there and request a copy, it's like, I want to say it's, I forget how much, I forget how expensive it is, but I did that originally when I was coming out, and so long ago now, I can't remember what it was, but I think it was $20, 30. I honestly don't know, but you can request a copy of it. You go to your Teach account.
Thank you. Next question is an OLAS question. If there's no person to be specifically addressed to in the job description, and you want to upload a specific cover letter, who is the best person to address instead of writing to whom it may concern, or is to whom it may concern more an appropriate title?
This is in line with what I had mentioned before about making it specific, personalized. So in the job description, if it doesn't say who, this is where you could do your research and go on to the district's website. And if there is a director of guidance and counseling, you could make it to them, or if it's assistant superintendent in charge of HR. If you're searching and you really can't figure it out where to send it to, you just can't, despite all your research, figure it out. I always say you could do make it to the superintendent of schools. I don't know if the other panelists, your feelings on that.
No, that sounds good to me.
Yeah.
So the next question, do you feel that the pandemic and having internship and practicum during the pandemic will have an adverse impact if you were primarily virtual during COVID?
I think that if you had an internship during the pandemic and were virtual, you have a wonderful skill set because you have become more creative, more tech savvy. You've utilized different strategies to connect with your students and families. So in my view, anyone who has worked with families and students during a pandemic has a whole new set of skills that they wouldn't have had without working during this time.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think a lot of us are definitely concerned about that. You have mostly people that are only having the opportunity to do a full internship virtual. And then you have my class who's hoping to get into the schools this year, but doing practicum, many of us virtually. So thank you. Yeah, that gives us a little bit of hope. I think that is a big concern for many of us that are currently in internship as well as practicum hours.
It's
a real struggle for all counselors right now. We all feel like we can't connect, we can't do what we would normally do. So that's something that as interns or practicum students, you have in common with people who are already in the field. You're all doing the same thing.
Thank you. Yeah. This is another letter of a recommendation question. Should we keep letters of recommendation handy to give to interviewers, or just putting them down as a reference is good enough and allow the interviewer to contact them should they require?
If you're on OLAS, they should probably already be on OLAS, so they already have all of your interview or all of your application materials. So what happens is when your file gets pulled and your file gets pulled, you apply, it goes up into the magic OLAS land. All of a sudden you get the call, get the interview. So what happens is the secretary, at least our school secretary, puts a file together for the entire committee. You get every person, you get the questions of what we're going to ask you, you get their person's resume, all the references, their application, everything for each candidate. And then that's how it works or whatever. So you don't really need to, if you want to bring your portfolio and have some copies of your resume and cover letters with you, that's fine. But just know that most schools probably are going to have already everything for the committee right then and there when you walk in.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, great to know. That's good, really good information. So we do have another question. Yes, for all those who came late or to the meeting, this is being uploaded to YouTube currently. So this is being recorded, and you will be able to access this probably tomorrow. Is that correct, Dr. Rotunda? He's shaking his head. Yes. So yes, it should be it should be available sometime either tonight or tomorrow. So if you have any want to refer back to this, yes. If you missed part of the questioning at the beginning, please feel free to watch it, and you could rewatch it again if you would love to watch this again. I'm just checking to see if there's any other questions that I might have passed over.
Can I just say one more thing too?
Yes, please.
Be careful, and again, I've seen people do this before in interviews. Be careful when you name drop. If you start to name drop someone in the school district, or say, "Oh, I know so and so," or whatever, be careful, because say, for example, and again, I know this wouldn't be the case, but Mary's on the interview committee, and what if, or she's not on the committee, and what if people in her district or school don't like her or something, and you name drop that person or whatever? Be careful. Mary's great. I don't think that would ever happen, but just be careful, name dropping, things like that. Just again, make the interview about you and your abilities to be able to enhance what the district already offers its students. So that just be careful doing that.
I would add, I was having technical difficulties and was unable to get through when you were first starting. I couldn't connect with Wi-Fi, but I don't know if you've mentioned social media, but it's really important to check your social media and see what there is out there with your name on it, what pictures. I think, every year we have a reminder, a workshop about what's appropriate, what's not on social media. And so I would just be very cautious and careful, because when there are candidates looking for jobs, my counseling intern, her sole job in her previous position was to research social media on candidates who were applying for jobs at the place she was working. And so just be careful what's out there. Make sure that you're reflected the way you want to be on social media.
We did not discuss it, so thank you. Thank you for bringing up that point. It was actually brought up in one of my classes 2 weeks ago with one of our professors that told us to make sure we have a personal, if you want to have a personal, but also have a professional, she recommended, to keep up with what's going on in the profession, but also you can refer people to your own professional social media presence as well. We do have a couple more questions that have come through on the form submission. Have race, social justice, and gender questions been coming up more in interviews?
I don't think you mean because of the recent events in the world. I haven't interviewed since then. I haven't had selection committees yet this year to speak to that. I know there are more issues in schools and in the community where I work.
Yeah, we haven't interviewed as well. But kind of going back to what Mary said about social media, be careful, because if you're out there and you're posting stuff on there, whether you're politically left, right, whatever, Black Lives Matters, LGBT, whatever, we all have an opinion on something. But just like I said, if you say one thing or whatever, you're going to automatically upset half of the other population. And whether you think it's a human rights or whatever, and we all have our own different opinions, whatever, just be very, very careful, because if you're part of a Facebook group or whatever and says, oh, this person's part of a Facebook group, but then they're an educator, how can they do, like, just be very, very careful. Either set your all stuff to private, or don't do it, or just have a professional page and just use it for the professional stuff. It's people, especially now I'm an assistant principal. It's my superintendent was just like, either get rid of your personal page or you make it completely private. Like she was very adamant about that when I got hired. And that was like, I want to say it's not a terms of agreement, but basically she was just like, you figure it out. And so just be very, very careful. People will be out to, I don't say they're out to get you, but now that I'm in a different position in terms of administrator and family, it's just be very careful.
No, with the question about race, what I would say is I could see that being a scenario question in an interview about what would your response be if an incident was reported to you and it had to do with, discrimination or, bias, or I could see that coming up. That could be a really good question, especially given the climate these days.
Hey, thank you. Yeah. I'm trying to see, this looks like one more question. This, I don't really understand one of the questions that was asked, so I'm going to try to keep that off of that. And I don't know if you want to answer this question, but it's definitely a question probably on almost all of our minds going into school counseling. What is the average salary for school counselors? I know it very much varies through the state, but this person specifically asking in New York City, so the DOE, which I know all three of you, I don't believe, have a good idea. But what is a beginning salary that we should be possibly seeing, and what affects that salary that we might be offered as a first year school counselors?
So it's funny those questions asked, but this is probably one of the most, I wish every district would just post their teacher contract and their administrator contract on their website so that people could literally just see, because it's annoying going through the process. And again, like we all obviously you're applying for a job because you have to make ends, whatever, like people just would want to know. And so it's like some districts like have it on their website and like some don't. So it just depends. But I think if you go to, what's the website for across the state? It's got if you're a state employee or a cop or a judge or whatever. What's up?
I think it's See Through New York.
Yeah, See Through NY. Yeah, you can go through there and you can literally see what anyone makes. So if you go through See Through NY, if you know people that work in education across the state or whatever, it's not going to tell you what their first year, actually, depending on how far back it goes, but it could tell you their salary or whatever. But again, it's going to depend, across the state. If you're down in Long Island versus rural New York, it's going to be completely different. Out in Western New York, Syracuse area, upstate New York, near like Placer or whatever, it's going to be completely different. I can tell you in the Albany area-ish, first year counselor, depending larger school is probably going to be somewhere between $40,000 to $53,000 or $54,000 ish, roughly, depending. So I would kind of say within that range.
And just as a show's comparison, on Long Island, I find it hard to believe that there are even schools districts left that are where a counselor would make between 40 and 50. I would think that it would be more, I think it's more like 60 or 70 for starting, and it could go up from there depending on, if you have any credits beyond your master's degree, goes by years experience and education level. And when you switch districts, most of the times you won't get paid for the experience that you have. But, it's interesting though, because education is one of the few professions where, I don't know, my experience is not really, you don't really ask that on an interview what the salary is. And you're not really told until you're offered the job, where most other professions, at the beginning what the salary is. It's so interesting. Because even if you post a pay scale, it doesn't mean that that's what you're going to get. You don't know what you're going to be offered on that pay scale.
I would just say years ago when I started, I worked for the local county BOCES, the Board of Cooperative Educational Services. And then after 3 years, I transferred to a district. And when I transferred to the district, the HR person said, well, you have 3 years and we're condensing our pay scale. So everyone who's had 1, 2, or 3 years is being condensed to step 1. And I didn't know any better. So I was like, well, okay, it was still more than I was making in my previous position, but I took it for granted that that's what, you get paid on this pay scale as to how many years of experience. Well, I was hired as I was a special ed teacher at the time and was the team leader. And we needed one more person on our team. And we hired a friend of mine who had the same level of experience, but was married and had a baby on the way. And after he got his job, he said, wow, it's great. I'm on step 8. And I said, what do you mean you're on step 8? This is like 10 days after I was hired. And I went back to our HR director and I said, wait a minute, there's an equity here. And he said, Mary, you just didn't know how to negotiate. And there was nothing I could do until I went for my next job. So I don't know, if other people who are more current in the field right now negotiate their salaries, but it's something to ask about and talk about and think about before you get to that point.
Wow.
Yeah, I've seen some negotiation when you're going from one similar job to another similar job. But I've had that happen too. I was step 6 in a school counselor job and I got accessed and I got another job and they were like, step 1, take it or leave it. And then I got called back to my old school and they had to give me the step. But it's really got to do with the job market at that time. Because there's lots more candidates than there are jobs. And so it's a buyer's market. It's different at other times. You don't see much negotiation. I saw very little, if any, negotiation for, somebody right out of school. That's, step 1, have a nice day.
That was kind of the next question that came in. How do you properly and respectfully negotiate? Can you?
Yeah, there's really not much to go on. Just 2 quick stories. I had a buddy last year got hired at a local school district, or 2 years. I think he's in his 3rd year now. But when he got hired, he was able to get like step 8 because he came from the higher ed background, so they gave him some years of experience working in higher ed. He was also an HEOP director at a small 2-year school as well, so he got some experience for that and step for that. And then this past year, I negotiated for the first time ever a salary because now that I'm assistant principal, and I did a lot of research and everything like that, and like it got to the point it was like really funny. So like our superintendent, it came back and I told her what the number I wanted, and she's like, absolutely not. And so I was like, oh, okay. And then so I went back, and then and then I did the whole thing of, all right, well, I mean, we're really only off $1,500 here, so it was a really interesting experience, but definitely, do your research and everything. But like I said, in terms of school council position, you're probably not going to have, especially that initial position. It's typically tied to credits in terms of if you have your 60 credits. If you don't have any experience at all, you're probably going to be in step 1. There's a local school around here that they do 3-for-1 steps. So if you transfer and you've got 6 years experience, you go to the new school, you're going to be on step 2. And so it just depends like that as well. So. But probably not going to be much negotiation. But if you get to that point, certainly, hopefully you've done your research on it because it doesn't happen too often.
And this question just came in, and I know this might affect a few people here. I know in my program that this would affect them. Speaking of salary, would a teacher with 10 years experience in a public school take a salary step reduction as a new school counselor? And I don't know if you're able to answer that. Does transferring credits from being a teacher affect your salary step? And I guess on that same line, if you have master's degree or something in another field, does that affect your step as well?
So if you're going from a teacher to a counselor, that's where you could negotiate because you have years. They'll probably try to work. I don't want to say that. They could try to put you on step one, saying that you haven't been a counselor before, but because it's still all within a teacher's contract, I think that that's where you might have room to negotiate, especially if it's still within the district where you currently work. And Corey, the other question was about the master's degree.
Yeah, if you have, because those folks that are teachers typically already have a master's degree plus their credits. Do any of those credits count towards the school counseling plus credits
For pay.
for pay?
Yes. Yeah. So you would be, so if you have two master's degrees, it's likely to believe, I can't speak for all school districts, but it's reasonable to believe that your first master's degree would count as master's, and that your second master's degree, the credits within that would be the plus. So it would be master's plus 60.
I would say that that's a two-part answer. It would depend on whether if you were staying in the same district and just changing job titles, your steps and your credits are all going to remain. If you're changing from being a teacher to a counselor and changing districts, then you got a negotiation point. I can think of we had a counselor, we had a new counselor in my building who we hired, who had been a health teacher in the building for like 10 years, already had a master's. So when she became a counselor, she just changed job titles. She still kept all of her steps. She kept all of that kind of stuff. She just, changed job positions. That's the way it worked in my district.
Thank you. I believe that is all the questions. I was checking the anonymous submissions and the submissions that were also on here. Would you all, if anyone, James was asked if he could share his email address. Would you all mind dropping your email addresses if students or any of our participants have any questions? Do you mind them reaching out to you?
No, I don't mind at all.
No problem.
I don't know. The other
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
thing too is if there's any counselors of color that are on grad students, over the past 2 years in 2019, I started meeting with counselors of color across the state. So this year, I think we have 3 or 4 times. Our next meeting is next Wednesday, the 31st of March. And we just meet to connect together. There's also a great Facebook group of counselors of color from all across the country and the world. So if you are a counselor of color, feel free to reach out to me with your email address, and I'm happy to add you to our listserv. Some people put out some awesome summer programming for students as well. Scholarship opportunities, PD opportunities, different interesting articles as well. So certainly if you are a counselor of color, definitely reach out to me, and I'm happy to get you connected with some of those that information. So
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And James, you do have 2 programs happening next month. Would you like to speak about those?
yeah, sure. So April 8th is going to be a first-year counselor panel. So if you're a NISCA member, if you're not, I encourage you to become a NISCA member. It's free to NISCA members. That's going to be a first-year counselor panel talking about the interview process in terms of counselors literally that last spring or summertime just went through the interview process for the first time at multiple different schools. We have a counselor represented from the elementary, middle, and high school level that they're all working actually in the capital region. And so they'll be able to talk to you about their first year experience in terms of being a counselor and what's it really like actually, going from an intern to being a counselor. So that'll happen April 8th, and I believe that's from 3 to 4 p.m. And then the following week will be our part 2 of that. That's going to be April 15th from 3 to 4. And it's going to be more towards talking about cover letter and resume specifically in terms of what you should have. So get more in detailed. And any questions you have, feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to answer. So both those programs normally would be one day and in person, but with COVID and everything, we've had to kind of be flexible and adaptable. But look forward to seeing many of you there as well.
And hopefully that means better attendance. That's one of the good things about doing everything virtually, is that it gives it more accessibility to folks that may not have been able to attend that. So thank you for sharing that. Any other questions before we go? give you guys a moment to, if you do. I see we're starting to lose some folks.
I just wanted to say that tomorrow morning, I'll send a link to the recording to everybody who's registered, as well as a link to the chats. We always save the chats too, because there's a lot of email addresses and links and whatnot in the chats. So I'll do that first thing in the morning.
Great. Awesome. And I'll re-express everything that's being said in the chat right now. Thank you all to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day and busy schedule. This, I think we had about I saw at least 140 attendees tonight. So really successful, really awesome that you were able to take the time. I thank you so much and supporting our graduate students and your future colleagues. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. This is my first event as the graduate student liaison. So I appreciate it. Thank you all. And thank you all for taking the time out of your day to attend the webinar. And I really hope this was beneficial to all those that attended as well. So thank you all so much. I'll stick around maybe a minute or two. If you do have any questions, I'll look in there. And like James said, he's hosting a couple. And if you have any suggestions, you all have my email. Please send me an email. I'll type it in the message box as well for any other programs that you might be interested in hosting, excuse me. So thank you once again, panelists, and thank you for our attendees.